Welcome to Imagine Otherwise, the podcast about the people and projects bridging art, activism, and academia to build better worlds. Episodes offer in-depth interviews with creators who use culture for social justice and explore the nitty-gritty work of imagining otherwise. I'm your host, Kathy Hanneback. Given everything that's going on in the world right now, writing is the last thing on many people's minds. Amidst the uncertainty, anxiety, and grief, many of our writing projects have taken a back seat to other more pressing demands. But what if we approach writing not as a solitary distraction or a productivity demand, but rather as a vital source of social support? How might the bonds forged through collaborative writing with another sustain us through this incredibly difficult time? My guests for today's episode, Juana María Rodríguez and Emma Pérez, have published 6 books between them and are working on 2 more. But as they explain in our conversation, they approach writing not just as an individual obligation to publish, but as a daily craft, a cultivated practice built on queer intimacy and mutual support. As long-term writing partners, Juana and Emma show us what it means to truly trust someone else with our words, and what it means to hold space for another over time, distance, and radical change. In our interview, we discussed the changes that COVID-19 has brought to their daily writing routines, how to harness the unsexy parts of writing when inspiration seems hard to come by, building long-term writing partnerships that offer life support as much as writing support, and the vitality of queer friendship as a way to imagine otherwise. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much, Kathy.
So, like a lot of writers and scholars in this age of a global pandemic, we are all working under very different circumstances than we normally do. And I would love to talk to you too about your writing routines broadly, maybe how you approach writing and your writing goals and your writing projects under normal circumstances as well, but also maybe how you've been navigating that in our current moment. So how maybe have your writing routines or practices changed in these recent times, and how are you navigating some of those changes?
Well, one of the things is I think I had a pretty healthy writing practice before all of this happened. I'm on this great group writing every day. And so my goal is generally to try to write a little something every day, even if it's just half an hour, and just kind of build that up, every day. So for me, initially, there was just a lot of disruption. I couldn't focus. I couldn't sort of get centered. And, but now I'm sort of getting back to that normal. So I get to sort of pretend in my kind of normal writing day that this is just a normal day. I'm just doing what I always do. So it's kind of trying to sort of reach for that sense of normal. And I think my writing routine really helps me more than anything else feel okay.
Emma, do you also have that feeling of writing being something that grounds you or makes you feel a little bit more normal?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, like Juana María, I've had a writing routine for a long career as a professor as well. And the thing about writing, and Juana María and I talk about this a lot too, is that when we get sabbaticals, when we get extended time away from the university and all of the demands, because I've chaired before, and I know how Juana María is doing that right now, and I know how demanding that can be, and committee work and all of that stuff. So selfishly, I feel really guilty right now because I have this time. I'm one of the lucky ones that can focus on my writing, and I'm happy that I finally have some time, and it's a horrible time for so many people. And I do get depressed, though. Believe me, if I read the news too much, then I go into deep denial for the afternoon, and I bury myself inside my writing project. But without the writing, and I, like Juana María, I do have I try to be pretty disciplined, and I think that getting up in the morning and writing immediately helps me tremendously. And then it will determine whether I have a good day or not.
That's so true. So what we do, so Emma and I write together. And what we do is, I wake up, I'm laying in bed, I'm kind of tweeting. And at some point I'll send Emma a text and say, are you writing? And Emma will say, okay, I'm getting my coffee. And we're kind of getting our coffee together. And then at some point, you ready? Sure. And somebody sets a timer and we write for 30 minutes. And so it's kind of become our morning routine. Before I answer any emails, before I kind of look at anything else, I might kind of, poke around in the news, but really the first thing that I do every day is write. And doing that with just, the commitment is just 30 minutes. So for the most part, I think Emma, we honor at least 30 minutes a day. Yeah.
A minimum. But usually, we do go on.
Yeah.
A lot of the time we do 90 minutes easy. And the reason we have to stop is, Juana Maria is chairing, so she goes off to meetings. Sometimes I have certainly email from work and different things to do, FaceTime with my daughter so we can do her homework, things like that. I just really relish the mornings when I know that I'm going to get a text, or I'll send a text and say, hey, let's do this. And it's a way of really encouraging you to get there and to get to the computer without checking my horoscope and checking all the email and checking the latest news about whatever, right? So yeah, it's helpful to check in with someone, even if we don't always share the writing immediately.
It seems too, it's a way to kind of to get the writing done before the world impinges, right? Like before the news starts becoming real, before the email gets open, before the life stuff, both good and bad, starts to become more prominent. It's writing first, right?
Yeah.
And ideas, like I remember when all of the COVID stuff started, it was so hard. It was just so hard to get back to that routine. And it was like, okay, I'm just going to do a half hour. Just going to do a half hour. And that seemed like, okay, even if I'm just kind of moving those words around on a screen for half an hour, it was a little something. And if I can commit to that half hour, if I've been away from it for a while, I'm writing every day. A couple of times I've thrown out these like 10-day challenge, right? Mm-hmm. Because I find that if I do 30 minutes a day, maybe the first day or the second day, nothing really happens. I'm just staring at my screen. I'm frustrated, whatever. That by day 3 or 4, I'm excited to get back to it. And so I think having the commitment be really small, really manageable, makes it possible. Like I say, I'm chairing in the middle of a goddamn pandemic. So, I'm not teaching, so I don't really have a lot of intellectual stimulation. So even just having that little half hour where I feel like a writer, where I feel like, I'm in the realm of ideas, makes me do the kind of drudgery of emails and reports and spreadsheets possible.
One of the things that I talk a lot with clients is people's fear of, or guilt, I should say, over not writing, or not writing enough, or not writing for long enough, or not writing in the way that they wanted to, or not fill in the blanks. Of everybody has their own kind of personalized version of that guilt or anxiety. I'm curious how you two set boundaries on your writing, or give yourself maybe permission to not feel guilty when you don't write, or you can't write, or life impinges, because it always does, and the writing is just not going to happen today. How do you set those kind of boundaries, or navigate those feelings of guilt?
It's funny, because sometimes I feel guilty because I'm writing, not the other way around. Because I should be doing this other thing. So there's a little bit of flipping that. Not writing. If I can't do it, I just don't do it. I think I don't have that guilt because I don't have Emma and I have sort of talked about this. It's like at this point, there's not any kind of, I'm not really doing this for anyone else. So I'm not disappointing anyone if I don't write. No one's expecting this. It doesn't impact my career. It's not going to get me more money. It's not like going to change my status in the world. It's just, it's for me. And if I have every now and then I do have like an early meeting, or I have something that's like, okay, I can't do it today. And it's like, sorry, Emma, I can't, I'm not writing today. I have this to do. And that actually just feels okay.
Yeah. Juana Maria is healthier than I am. Because I do punish myself. If I only write, for example, yesterday, I think I wrote 22 words. And so I feel lousy for the rest of the day because I pressure myself a lot. And I'm working on fiction right now. So I go back and forth between the fiction and the academic work. But the fiction is what feeds my soul and my heart. And it's harder for me to do the fiction because it takes so long to get a novel the way that I wanted. And I'm towards the end of this one. I'm on part 3. So I've been mulling ideas a lot, and I've been looking at the draft a lot. And I, now I'm dreaming the characters. So it's a good place to be. And it's because I haven't been interrupted with other stuff. Although I still have, I do feel guilty because I'm not doing the work that I need to do for my program as quickly as I should be doing it. And people have to harangue me, and I kind of have to let go of that and say, okay, I will get to it. I'll make time for it in the afternoon when I've done my writing. But yeah, I do tend to pressure myself too much. Like, is it going to be good enough? And like Juana Maria, though, it's not as if it's going to transform my life or transform my career. What it does, though, is feed my soul. And I am able to, if I'm able to write for and reach the people I love, my friends and family, and if they like something I've written or they're moved by it, then it brings me a lot of happiness. Because that's the joy of writing daily is just such a privilege and such a luxury. But it's also work, and the work sometimes is really difficult and but you got to put the time in. Like anything else, you got to put the time in. It's a craft. And sometimes that craft is just kicking your butt, and you got to stay with it. And sometimes you can't because there's work. I don't get paid to write my fiction. I write the fiction because I love it. I get paid to be an academic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love it too. I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was going to ask, do you find that you approach the fiction differently in terms of a writing routine or practice than the scholarship, or is it pretty similar for you?
It's similar in many ways because you still need to be disciplined about it. No matter what, it's its own craft, it's its own language. And it's really just about trading, finding the different voices. And you do with academic work for it to be seamless. And Juana Maria knows that because she's working on this really beautiful academic book right now. And that you need to stay with it daily in order for it to be seamless. And the same thing goes for fiction. I think that when I have long periods of time, the characters are more consistent, and I'm able to find the inconsistencies in the story. And the same for an academic article or a chapter, right, or a book. Where are the inconsistencies in that? Does it flow well enough? Are the arguments consistent? So, but for me, it is a matter of trading, of thinking about the voice differently. Sometimes I'll pick up an academic. If I'm deep in the fiction the way I am now, and I pick up something academic, I'm like, what? I wrote that? I don't remember that voice at all. And it happens the other way around too, when I'm deep in academic stuff. And I don't believe I've written that book, that novel, right? Because
interesting.
It's kind of weird. It's like getting to know that other part again.
I think the dailiness, this sense of, when I sit down to write, the first thing I'm doing is kind of reading what I wrote yesterday. And so, some of these sentences, are revised like, 6 times. And before I can kind of move on. And so I think there's something about what the practice does to things like flow that really matter. That said, I was really kind of depressed about maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I felt my writing was kind of like flat and boring, and it didn't have life or sparkle, or, I was kind of in a funky place. And my writing reflected that. But because I was still writing every day, some of the pieces of the project, maybe the biography of the photographer, or maybe the historical elements of the period I was writing about, I still had to write those. And then kind of when that, period of depression started to lift, I had prose that I could go back to and imbue with another kind of spirit or energy or vitality that was kind of missing the first time around. Sometimes when you're kind of inundated with these other kinds of pressures, you just don't have kind of the joy in the writing. But you can still move it forward. So I guess I just sort of want to talk about that, sort of mention that too, that we're not always in this kind of inspired place, but the practice actually gives you're moving forward, and just the kind of movement of it unblocks things, opens up other possibilities.
I agree. Absolutely. I mean, who was it? James Baldwin, who would talk about how the characters weren't talking to him today and his frustrations over that. So yeah, I mean, you don't wait around for a muse. You just do it. And I think that's something that we all have to be aware of most writers are aware of, that it's a craft like any, and you develop it, and you only develop it by putting in the time. And sometimes you write some pretty shitty sentences.
Yep.
Indeed.
And
you have to write those, right?
Yes,
like it's not like you can skip over the bad stuff to get directly to the good stuff. It's the good stuff only happens through the bad stuff.
Absolutely. And you've got to be, this was when I was when I was dissertating, I had a Post-it up on right next to my computer that said, I give myself permission to write shit. and I had to, because so much of it, first draft, second draft, even third, is still shitty, and it takes a while to get to the kind of prose that you are willing to have other people see, right?
I really like both of your points about how there are deeply unsexy parts of writing that still have to get done, right? Like whether it's just the pure description of literally this is the historical period and this is who the leaders are, or whatever it is you're describing that's like not particularly compelling, or citations or formatting stuff, the deeply unsexy parts of any manuscript. And I'm a big fan of tackling those when you have really low energy for exactly that reason. Like, you can mess around with the commas. You can fix the citation formatting here, even if you can't come up with a brilliant idea about how to explain that character or how to explain that idea. So I think that's really smart. So one of the reasons why I was so excited to interview you together is because of your collaboration relationship. And I know you both support each other's work in a whole host of ways. You, as you described, you write together, you cheer each other on as you work through your various projects. What's the story of how you two started working together in this way?
Let's see.
I'll let you go first, Juana María.
So Emma and I dated. So we dated, and I think it's this kind of great way in which, like, queer sociality allows itself to transform into other things, right? And so even though, we didn't really sort of work as partners, we're like really great writing buddies. And so it really just sort of started like that. It kind of grew out of our friendship. Our friendship grew out of our dating, and our writing grew out of our friendship. And so I think all of these things were kind of connected in this really interesting way. And literally, I talk to Emma almost every day, right? Or we're in touch almost every day. And so has just become a really a kind of partner for me, just someone who I just really value in my life, and that I kind of imagine a futurity with, right? Like, hopefully there'll be a next project. So I kind of imagine us writing together, into the future.
I mean, it's kind of funny because, we did date a couple of years ago, I guess?
Yeah.
I guess it was a couple of years ago. And it was, it was brief. I think we both realized pretty quickly that we made better friends than that kind of intimate partner. But as friends, we have a really special intimacy. And I was really pleased that we could transform and translate that intimacy into a friendship where we trust each other. And it takes a lot to share writing with someone, because you really have to trust that person. And it takes a lot for me to do that. I have to have like a draft that's quite nearly perfect. And Juana Maria has, there are times when she says to me, just send it. It's okay, send it. So I do. But I do look at our friendship is incredibly, incredibly important to me. And I love the way that we encourage each other with the writing, but in other parts of our lives as well, right? I mean, just day to day often. And especially in these COVID times, because it's funny because we don't see each other often anyway, but when we do, it's kind of like, really? I haven't seen you in a year? That's weird, because I feel like I see you every day.
Yeah.
So this is like, we just keeping in touch with someone, I mean, is and who you have that kind of friendship with is so important. And futurity, absolutely. I mean, I have so many other projects on the back burner. And for me, again, it's like pressuring myself. I got to finish this dystopian novel that I've had on the back burner for 10 years now. And of course, this is the moment when it makes sense to finish it. So I can get back to some academic articles that I want to write as well. So I don't think Juana Maria is going to stop anytime soon, because she is becoming an incredible researcher of the archive, and she, before my eyes, is becoming an historian. I have a PhD in history, and hers is in ethnic studies, right?
Yep.
But she's become more and more. I mean, I'm familiar with her first two books. Her second book, I remember when I just need to say this because I remember this was many years before we became friends, although we knew about each other. And I was going to teach it in one of my grad classes, the Sexual Futures book. And I remember reading the introduction, and I just immediately fell into this crush with this woman, because I thought, oh my God, she writes this kind of prose in an academic book. And so, this is an incredible voice, and she's doing some amazing work, Sexual Futures, and then Queer Latinidad too. I mean, it's a foundational work. Sexual Futures is so beautifully written and so insightful and pushes the envelope. This is what I love about working with Juana Maria, is that she's willing to push the envelope and to go beyond the parameters of what is so imposed in academia.
I love the fact that Emma also writes fiction, and I remember poring through all three of her novels, like within the span of like 2 weeks, just because, the writing in each was so different. But I think there's a way in which we both kind of define ourselves as writers. We're both academics and they pay our bills, but I think we both think of ourselves as first and foremost writers. And when the job is over, the writing will still be there. It's not just for the institution. It's kind of for something else.
Absolutely. Yeah. It changes it, because then you have a different relationship to the institution, right? Because it's about it. The writing comes first. And we're in it. Well, we're fortunate. I'm very fortunate. I'm at a point in my life, finally. It's taken this long to get to a point in my life where I can prioritize the writing more so than other other things. I mean, I still have the other stuff. I still have committee work. I still have, so many letters to write, promotion letters, and that's the service work that has to be done. But I can prioritize the writing in ways that I didn't get to for at least 30 years unless I was on sabbatical or had a year on leave or something, right?
I think what's so interesting, I mean, your relationship is fascinating, and how you two support each other often on really different kinds of projects, right? Like, especially if Emma, you're working on a novel right now, Juana, you're working on a scholarly text. These are very different genres that have very different tones to them and voices and contexts. And yet you find ways to give feedback to each other on what is most useful for that person in this moment on that genre. And I think it's clear that you draw on your personal relationship, your deep friendship, to know what exactly the other person needs from me and my feedback on this, right? And I would love to hear more about kind of how you developed that, like how you figure out when you do exchange work and you read each other's work, how you figure out, first of all, how to explain to the other person what you need from their feedback. So just ignore the, hideous comma situation. That's not what I'm focusing on right now. Please give me feedback on this other thing or whatever it might be. But also how you read that in the other person. So someone has trusted you to share this piece of a draft. Maybe it's a version they don't feel is good enough to share, but they've gifted you with this. How do you learn how to figure out how to give them what they need?
It might be important to say that both Emma and I, when we share things, we're sharing things that are pretty done. And it doesn't mean that there's not more to do. There's always more to do. But I think some of that has to do with a kind of confidence that maybe just develops over the years, right? So it has been really important for me as I've been working through these kind of historical chapters. My anxiety is like, thanks, Emma, for saying I'm, passing as a historian, as someone that, knows about historical writing. But, there's kind of particular things. And then there's the craft. But a lot of, I think the support that we do is both about helping each other get to that desk. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes just figuring out, both Emma and I, we're full professors, the kinds of demands on our time, on our energy, the things we get asked to do, are pretty similar. So it's a lot of the support is like, I was asked to do this. Should I do this? Or, like our no committee, like giving each other, talking through projects that maybe we shouldn't sign on to, or how should I handle this situation? So there's also this other level of kind of professional support that we do for and with each other that is about kind of trusting our ethics as scholars and as professors, and understanding workflow and commitments and maybe what you can say no to and what you really, might be able to turn into something that you might want to do. So I think those things have just kind of evolved a little bit over time. And in terms of the writing, it's maybe I'm giving you questions, but I'm also just like, what do you think? Just, give me what you have. But we don't change work that often. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I want to add to that is Juana María is a Virgo, like a triple Virgo.
5 planets in Virgo.
Yeah.
5 planets Virgo.
I'm very familiar, having grown up with a father, a brother, a sister, and then having another ex who's like a Virgo. I'm very familiar with Virgos. So I rely on their minds that are so detailed and they're perfectionist. So often when Juana María hands me something of hers to read, she knows exactly what she wants. She's like, okay, I need you to look at this, this, and this. and don't bother about this. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. No worries. And I'm a little more general. For me, it's more like, okay, is it working? Are you picking up the intensity I'm trying to give? Do the characters, is it flowing? Is it seamless yet? That kind of thing. Or if it's an academic thing that she's read, then mostly I want her, especially if I'm doing something that's not historical and it's more theoretical, because I respect the way that she does so much theory, then I just want to know, is this working? Does it make sense to you? But yeah, I do check in because we get so many at this level. When you're a full professor and you're one of the few Latinx full professors who can also do queer, bisexual kinds of, trans reviews, critiques, you get called on a lot. And so we check in with each other. And I do check in with her and say, hey, do I need to do this? I really don't feel like I want to do it. And she's like, if you don't feel like you want to do it, don't do it. Save yourself for the things that you do want to do. And usually we can tell, but it's good to have a sounding board. It's good to go to someone who goes through the same thing and gets the same kinds of response, gets the same kind of requests, right? But yeah, I do emphasize that having a writing partner who's a Virgo does push her butt a little more.
For sure. So I know both of you work on long-term projects, right? Whether they be novels, scholarly books, research projects more broadly. These are things that take many years to produce, and a lot changes in that time, even under normal circumstances. And we're certainly dealing with a more extreme version of that right now. How do you two plan for and make progress on those kinds of long-term projects, knowing that there will be radical changes to it in the future?
I've written about issues that are evolving. I remember, writing about, it first came out as sodomy and sovereignty, about the situation in Puerto Rico. And this was this evolving situation that I was writing into. And every day there were sort of new things coming out about it. And so I'm not quite there now, but I think in terms of the long term, it's kind of about that practice. It's about doing the unsexy things. It's about just kind of moving forward a little bit. And then when you have a little more time, you sort of have a little more time. And then giving the project sort of room to grow. I think for this is my third book. And unlike Sexual Futures, where at some point I had different kinds of writing that then I found an arc for. For this project, I sort of started with a very clear sense of the archive. There's not so much an argument as there is a feeling, and just kind of moving. As long as I kept moving, I was, just sort of moving forward. So the energy behind it has felt really different. So this one has just kind of been easy. I saw it from the beginning, and now I'm just trying to actualize it. It's under contract for Duke University Press, so I'm hoping Duke University Press will still be standing after all of this. In fact, I've been actually having those little fantasies of trying to remember that moment of finishing, trying to remember that moment where you're working on your acknowledgments, where you see the whole thing. I've printed it out a couple of times. It just feels closer. But that's a feeling that I'm starting to feel now. But the last 3 or 4 years have just been kind of trudging along on a lot of unsexy things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a similar kind of approach, Emma?
Well, long-term publishing projects. I mean, novels for me, the academic book that I wrote, they take a long time for me. I'm a slow thinker, slow writer, because I want to process stuff. So I'm not, and then I think the fiction is different because I don't have an agent. So I don't have someone placing my stuff. I usually go go looking myself to who I think would be a good match, and it's usually the independent presses, with the exception of Forgetting the Alamo, the second novel, which was published by University of Texas Press, right? And university presses are usually a little easier to deal with because I'm familiar with them. And will they still be around? I mean, hopefully they are. They will continue to be around. It's harder for I don't know what's going to happen with some of the small presses right now. And for the kind of work that I do, I mean, my first novel was published by Third Woman Press, which is now defunct, right? Mm-hmm. So it got reprinted by Aunt Loot, which, is still around. I mean, it's the press that published Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands. And in fact, I remember Gloria saying to me that it was Borderlands that was keeping them afloat because they sold so many of them internationally. So Aunt Loot is still around. And I do, for me, it's these small independent presses that I like so much because they don't edit my work the way in which, say, a bigger press would with their own expectation. I always know what I want, and editors sometimes or readers can often think that they want it to take a different direction. But I'm always once I have the project the way I want it, I don't want people messing with it that much. Yes, I take criticism if it's not working, but I don't want them saying, oh no, your characters should really be doing this or that. And that really happened with Forgetting the Alamo, because I think people thought I was supposed to be writing the story about the Alamo. And I was like, okay, there's a reason for did you pay attention to the title? There's a reason for that title. We're looking at a whole other community that has not been written about during that time period. But yeah, I mean, I think that what worries me is how hard hit some of the presses will be, because they're always, it's become difficult for presses, right? And I think that's why so many have turned to ebooks as well. Mm-hmm. And electronic, I think some of my novels now are available electronically, and I think that's great as well. But I'm old-fashioned. I'm very 19th century. I like to hold something in my hand. This is one of the differences too in the way that Juana María and I write is that she uses Scrivener, and she keeps encouraging me. And I'm like, no, I need notebooks. I need fountain pens. I need journals that are a particular kind of cotton blend, and I need different colored ink for my fountain pens. And so I'm old-fashioned that way. And it just helps me process in a different kind of way from people who can use, something that I think Scrivener probably expedites work in a different way.
So this brings me to my favorite question that I get to ask folks, which really gets at the heart of why you approach writing the way that you do and why you write the amazing work that you do, both fiction and scholarship and everything in between. And that's that version of a better world that you're working towards when you write your novels, when you teach your classes, when you serve on committees, even when you create the work that you do in the universe. So I will ask you this giant question that really is at the heart of this podcast. So what's the world that you're working toward? What kind of world do you want?
That's a great question. I can answer the way that Miss America always answers: world peace, right? We all want world peace. But I think when I think back to when I started my first novel, because it was when I began dissertating too, I started the dissertation and my first novel at the same time. And I think that I started that novel back in the 90s, because I had grown up at a time through the 70s, and I came out in the 70s, and I couldn't find, there weren't that many queer novels around. Aside from things like Well of Loneliness and, some of the pulp fiction. And so I wanted a Chicanx queer lesbian novel. And so I wrote one, and there hadn't been any before. And so for me, and then while I was writing, I thought, okay, who am I writing for? I'm writing for an audience that can identify with these kinds of things, with issues of, not just coming out, but also sexual abuse, trauma, historical trauma around race, class, racism, gender oppression, etc., all of those things. So for me, it's like it's always going to be there in the writing, right? What is it that I'm trying to show? Even in Forgetting the Alamo and the academic book, Decolonial Imaginary, it's about how do we think differently, right? How are we going to permit ourselves to take a leap and think differently so that we free ourselves up from these boundaries and rigidities that don't allow for differences, for people to express their differences in ways that are freeing, right? I mean, I think we've been certainly, when we look at queer scholars, queer theory, trans scholars, the work that trans of color are doing too, it's like it opens up different kinds of avenues to the way we think. The latest work, the Crip work, I mean, there's so much to dedicate ourselves to so we can transform into an equitable society that listens to each other. I mean, I err on the side of hope, you know, and I am hoping for a better, that we'll make it out of this crisis that we're in to a better spiritual space, so that people begin to think about, okay, what is it that's really important for us? Certainly not the material things, certainly not the greed that we see expressed now in the oligarchy that's running the country, right? And running the globe, actually. So yeah, it's about transformation to a better, more equitable world, right? I mean, why do you do what you do, Kathy? I mean, isn't that also Imagine Otherwise is such a great title. I love the title of that, of your podcast. And it is about imagining a different, better, healthier space for everyone, right?
You know, I think particularly in this moment, I've just been thinking a lot about friendship. And what would it mean to treat each other from this kind of ethics of friendship, of how you would treat a friend, of, you know, to think of the ways in which we're interconnected, interrelated, and community. I mean, you know, again, writing every day really is a community that feels so important to me and is so important to my writing. But it's also a place kind of mentorship and of friendship. You know, this morning on Twitter, I posted a photograph and asked for words because I was running out of words, right? And so, and people on Twitter responded and gave me great, fabulous words. I mean, I think these are also sort of spaces of sharing, of community. And it's that sense of taking care of each other, of being present for one another, of paying attention to what our needs are, and trying to help us imagine a world where our needs are met, not just our physical needs, but our needs for connection and community and love and touch and care.
Absolutely.
Well, I just want to say thank you both so very much for being here and sharing all of these ways that you imagine otherwise.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. It's been a pleasure. It really has. Thank you for the work you do.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Imagine Otherwise. Imagine Otherwise is produced by Ideas on Fire, and this episode was created by me, Kathy Hanneback. You can check out the show notes for this episode on our website at ideasonfire.net, where you can also read about our fabulous guest, as well as find links to the people and projects we discussed on the show.